The Path Narrows is the fourth full-length album from Dallas, Texas-based technical death metal band Bearing Teeth, and we could additionally call them progressive death metal if you wanted to. There's certainly some Gorguts style lineage in where their idea came from, and they were doing that style probably before it was, maybe right when it was getting pretty big. And I would say if you were following Willowtip Records as much as I was back in the late 2000s into the early 2010s, they kind of had the market on that kind of style. And the way that Bearing Teeth stood out among early works from Ulcerate and bands like that was more in a style that was more atmospheric than a lot of its the other bands in that sort of edge at the time. And it was interesting because they came from sort of a sort of a mathcore, a grindcore background, and people would often associate their sound with grindcore and the sort of crazed, more technical side of grind that was popular around that time. So they were certainly in bands in that style, but it really wasn't what they were doing. What they were doing was more kind of psychedelic. It was doing more with atmosphere than a lot of bands were doing. Although we could slot their sound nowadays in hindsight next to some of the more hardcore, post-hardcore stuff that Flourishing was doing, some of the more noise rock feeling edges of Piran on their earlier records, but no one would blame you for associating their sound with Gorguts and Ulcerate and all that because of where they sort of came from. So their sound changed a little bit with each album, and I think the first record was probably the most adventurous to start, and they only became more aggressive and more run-oriented on the second record, and that kind of opened up a little bit more in terms of possibilities on the third, which was, I would say, kind of the typical, the heavier parts are heavier, the softer parts are softer, and you kind of got more of a dynamic from the band at that point. They had certainly matured and moved around a bit. So where have they gone with it with this record? It's been quite a few years. I think a pretty, not so much a predictable place, but one that is more distinctly their own nowadays. So let's cut into a song here and just get a general sense of that. So this is a band that I've always remembered as being like a pretty good band to use dissonance in phrase and make sense of it. Feel like there's an intelligence behind the machine that isn't just driven by technique. The skill is a huge part of what they put together, how they put together songs, and they're a very tight trio as you can find from any performance early on until now. So they're impressive musicians, but they do put something behind it that is more than a machine and more of a, a thing that just kind of fucks you up with all of its notes. And I think most of this album, it's not that it doesn't go anywhere, it's not that it doesn't take you to a place, but it's almost like they want to slow down on this record, and they want to slow down into these more doomed sections, these heavier pieces that are not so interested in feeding you a ton of notes and making you translate all of it. So I liked that. I liked that. Not that it was slower so much as it was more atmospheric, and it felt like a little bit of a return to the sound they were going for on the first album in some respects, but also making better use of the space that they have with this recording experience. So I think it all kind of comes together really well in this record for my taste. And in terms of all, as much as they pack into 40 minutes, it does feel like a very intense session, but it's not so overwhelming that it just felt like a demonstration to sell me a guitar or some lessons, So it still feels like death metal in that sense, and it does feel like its own style of technical death metal in that sense. So I'm a big fan of this band. I have been for a while. I've been following them since the first record. I had a lot of friends recommend this band to me back in 2011, and I've stuck kind of with their releases since. So I was really excited about this one. I think it meets those expectations. I think I probably like it a little bit better than the last, but that's always been the case. They've always not so much iterated, but the experience has been additive. It's been smarter and more sentient with each release, and this is the one that I think gets the atmosphere and the feeling of doom and best, I think. So there's this degradation that happens over the course of this record that's just really intense, and it's a unique experience for this type of music in 2023. So it's a standout to me. It's a high recommendation, and an easy grab on my part. So check out the written review for more details, and check out the album. It releases this Friday.
Oh,